starting now. Alrighty, well, we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Hannafin. I work for the Federal Transit Administration within the Office of Regional Services and headquarters, and helping support and organize this 6-part webinar series, the logistics, and working with really my partners, constituents, and colleagues across FTA, including within the regional offices and the different headquarters offices, various subject matter experts to provide this curriculum. And I will be coordinating the future ones as well. So I'm kind of on hand to help with any logistics and questions you have related to the webinar series. Just so we can, get things started with the webinar. Again, this is a financial technical capacity webinar. It's the second webinar in the 6-part series. The first one was legal capacity and civil rights. Today's presentation is going to be by Brett Martin. I'm not Brett Martin. I'll introduce Brett in a moment, and he works with the Office of Transit Programs and serves as the Urbanized Area Formula Grants Program Manager. Just so we all first off, just as a disclaimer, I just want to make sure everyone's aware, the documentation, the presentation itself doesn't have the full force and effect of law, and that you should always refer to FTA's own statutes and the related laws, corresponding laws. This is much of this is higher level information, and of course we want to ensure that you all are abiding by that law as well in conducting your own due diligence. As far as the agenda for today, I just wanted to do a quick introduction again of FTA, the webinar series, and then Brett is going to give a presentation on this topic. It's actually a really critical topic. It's a prerequisite to becoming an FTA grant recipient. And so he'll go over just the prerequisites, examples of prerequisites, and then just the broader topic of financial capacity and technical capacity. We are going to leave some time at the end of this presentation. We anticipate the presentation to be about 30 minutes. So we are planning to leave some time at the end for a Q&A session. And on that note, just so everyone understands how to participate and how to submit questions, there's a little tool, it should be a little tool as part of the Zoom webinar application at the bottom. There's this icon Q&A. And if you click on that, you can basically just submit a question directly to us, and a number of the panelists here and on the FTA side, the participants, have access to that. And so we're going to hold off on answering the questions to the very end, but we'll, take note of those questions and make sure we answer them. And to the extent that we aren't able to answer the questions on the fly, we will send out a written response after the fact, just to ensure that you get a question. Moving into just like the Federal Transit Administration. So first off, welcome. It's really an exciting time for you all and bringing you all in as partners in delivering really critical infrastructure projects. We look forward to this partnership. I know many of you are new to this process or had a slightly different relationship with FTA and receiving federal grants, whether as a subrecipient to another recipient. And so, we are here as part of our mission, again, to improve America's communities through public transportation. There is, in many cases, a very multimodal nexus to that. Transit does have a huge part to play in terms of mobility and equity. And so we very much look forward to working with you all to improve your own communities through access to public transportation and investing in public transportation. Just really quick, I mentioned I work with the Office of Regional Services within FTA. So FTA is just one of the modal administrations within the Department of Transportation. The Regional Services Office is a newer office, and we kind of advocate for the different field offices, which are the regions. Most of you will have touch points with region staff specifically. There are 10 FTA regions. And getting into just this whole new recipient onboarding need and the curriculum that we've developed, there are a number of reasons in which folks become new recipients. And sometimes it's just related to a new discretionary grant or fund allocation, right? There's a number of discretionary programs that FTA has, and some that are some were created or expanded under the bipartisan infrastructure law. In other cases, it could be the result of census changes. Obviously, the 2020 census was relatively recent, and so that had implications. It's just formula apportionment, and then just a number of subrecipients, formerly of a state, for instance, and now coming to us as direct recipients. And so they're trying to access formula dollars allocated to maybe an urbanized area. So there's a lot of different circumstances in which folks are now being brought in as a recipient, an FTA grant recipient. And so in preparing this curriculum, we realized that this audience represents folks in many different circumstances, right? Like why they are a recipient, whether it's formula or discretionary money or both. And really this pilot is meant to provide high-level information as an introduction to these topics. This is meant to complement what a lot of the FTA region staff are going to be doing in terms of onboarding you and supporting you. And so we're hoping that this does provide some good guidance. Like I said, it's going to be recorded. We are going to send out a PDF version of the slide deck. These slide decks actually have like web links, URLs in them. So when you get access to the PDFs, there's a few resource pages, and you'll be able to just click on those web links, and they'll take you directly to that reference material or resource material on the FTA website. There's a lot of really good material on the FTA website. It's a huge repository of information, valuable information. And so what we're going to provide is really like a distilled version of these really big topics, and then the critical links and reference materials, so you all can follow up with that later. Also just mention, FTA in general, the regions and the subject matter experts in the regions and headquarters are on hand to support you through all this, right? We want to be able to provide guidance, and that's just part of the process of bringing you on board. And it's not just like the front end of like, you're a recipient, now what? It's also a continuous relationship, right? And that's something you'll probably be learning a little bit more about. It's part of the requirements, right, in terms of like project oversight and then systems access. It's an ongoing relationship. So I mentioned, FTA is broken up into 10 different regions. This is just a map of the regions, and by now I think many of you have or will soon be in contact with region staff. They're your go-to resource when it comes to just this general onboarding, but just questions in terms of like grant applications and submitting information and compliance. They're very valuable and knowledgeable. I work with them, pretty closely myself. Now, getting into the webinar series, again, the 6-part webinar series really covers 3 main areas, and it's an introduction, really. The first two webinars we have, and this is the second one, the first 2 relate to prerequisites to becoming an FTA grant recipient. So the first webinar, which we already had about 2-3 weeks ago, covered legal capacity and civil rights. This one is concerning, technical and financial capacity. We're also going to have one related to systems access and grant making, but the specific software and tools, and it's going to be, again, an overview, and there's other materials you'll definitely want to review related to that, and then just ongoing kind of compliance and reporting, and whether that's project specific, program specific, or agency specific. Again, purpose is just to educate you all and give you this primer on what it takes to become and maintain, being your status as an FTA grant recipient. The target audience is new grant recipients, as a result of the census or these other type of discretionary programs. You've probably already seen this list. Many of you already signed up for every single one of these. If you have any questions related to the content or questions you want to ask in advance, I know some of you did submit some questions in advance. You're welcome to do that, and we'll address them to the extent that we can during the webinar. I'm going to transition this over to Brett, just get into the meat of the topic. And And this is just the general presentation topic. So Brett, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
All right. Thank you, Robert. Can you hear me and can you see me? We good? We good there? All right.
Yes, I can hear you. I can see you.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Brett.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert, and good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending on your time zone. I am Brett Martin, FTA's Urbanized Area Formula Grants Program Manager in FTA's Office of Transit Programs at our headquarters in Washington, D.C. And I'm very happy to be here with you this afternoon, and I want to say welcome to any prospective first-time FTA grant recipients who may have joined us, as well as any already active or returning grantees who also may be tuning in to learn more about FTA's recipient requirements. While I am joining you in my current role with FTA, I have been in your shoes. Prior to joining FTA, I spent more than a decade working with a number of transit providers at an MPO and for local government transit providers. And I led the transition of transit providers from rural to urban funding and to be set up as direct recipients of FTA funds in response to the decennial census a decade ago in 2010. So today I'm going to provide an overview of a couple of very essential FTA grant recipient prerequisites that apply to first-time FTA funding grantees, as well as to all grantees on an ongoing basis as they continue to receive and use FTA funds to support the provision of public transportation service throughout the U.S. These include the concepts of financial capacity and technical capacity. Okay, so to start, we'll start with what is an FTA recipient. When we refer to recipients, you may hear us refer to designated recipients, direct recipients, grantees, or subrecipients. And I'm going to briefly break that down here. And we'll start with what is the role of a designated recipient. Designated recipients and states are the entities to which FTA makes formula funds available for their own use or for distribution to other eligible entities. So it is these entities that have that more local control to apportion or suballocate funds to eligible projects and recipients in urbanized areas. A designated recipient does this for urbanized areas with a population of 200,000 or more, and states do this for urbanized areas with a population of less than 200,000. When we very broadly or generally refer to recipients, we are most often referring to direct recipients or grantees. And in effect, these are public entities that may receive funds directly from FTA. All grantees that receive funds directly from FTA are direct recipients, but not all grantees or direct recipients are designated recipients. In order for recipients to receive funds directly, they enter into a grant agreement with FTA that requires the recipient to comply with a number of provisions and parameters that are attached to the subject funds, as set by legislation authorizing the funds and the use thereof, as well as federal administrative regulations and agency policy. As a result, this also subjects the recipient to FTA oversight requirements and practices, including reporting requirements and compliance reviews, such as our triennial review process that reviews recipient compliance every 3 years. Tying this back to the role of designated recipients and states for FTA's formula programs, such as Section 5307 or urbanized area formula grants, a direct recipient must first be authorized to receive funds FTA has made available by either the state in which the recipient operates for recipients in small urbanized areas or those with population of less than 200,000, or a locally appointed designated recipient in large urbanized areas, or those with a population of 200,000 or more. For FTA's discretionary programs, such an entity must first be authorized by the Secretary of Transportation to receive funds for a specific project or activity, and this is typically done through an application and competitive selection process administered by FTA, such as our discretionary grants for buses and bus facilities program, or through a special congressional appropriation, such as our congressionally directed community projects appropriations. Okay, so for formula programs that make funds available for use in urbanized areas, such as Section 5307, this graphic hopefully helps us visualize the relationship between FTA's making funds available to states and designated recipients, and at their discretion, serving in a role of further allocating funds to either direct recipients or subrecipients of the state or designated recipient, or of a separate direct recipient. As mentioned, in order for an entity to be a direct recipient of FTA formula funds, that entity must be authorized by the state or designated recipient to receive grants directly from FTA. Okay, so who are potential new direct recipients? Well, you could previously have been a rural subrecipient of FTA funds through your respective state, or a subrecipient of urban funds through your respective state, designated recipient, or another direct recipient, but now will be authorized to directly receive urbanized area formula funds. We just had another decennial census for which new urban area boundaries were delineated that is likely prompting the transition of rural subrecipients to urban direct recipients. A new direct recipient could also be a completely new public transit provider in an urbanized area, or a pre-existing public transit provider in an urbanized area that has not previously received FTA funds. A new direct recipient could also be an entity that has not previously received formula funds as a direct recipient, but will receive a discretionary award as a direct recipient, such as for our discretionary grants for buses and bus facilities program. Okay, so what purpose does an FTA prerequisite serve? And this is the why for our new recipient prerequisites. Okay. So first, it assists both FTA and the prospective recipient in determining compliance with statutes and established policies that apply to the use of FTA funds. As much as FTA loves to provide funding to support our nation's public transit systems and seeing the impact it has on communities, in doing so, we have to follow the law, as well as sound policies and program management practices to ensure responsible and accountable use of those funds, as well as a level playing field for our recipients nationwide. Our recipients also, our prerequisites also allow us to assess recipients' abilities to carry out funded activities with the necessary resources and means. We really need to know that if we give an entity money to carry out an activity or project, that the entity is appropriately equipped to perform on the activity or complete the project and conduct its business in doing so in a federally compliant manner. And one very important point I'd like to make is the prerequisites don't just protect FTA's interest, but they also work to inform recipients on how they may need to be positioned to conduct their business using FTA funds and toward identifying and remediating potential areas of known risk based on FTA's experience in working with thousands of recipients over the past 6 decades. Some common fundamental questions we would ask to help identify and remediate these potential areas of risk include: is the applicant or prospective recipient legally able to receive funds? Does the applicant have the capacity to complete activities covered by the scope of an award and under applicable program requirements that are attached to the use of the subject funds? And does the applicant or prospective recipient have sufficient resources to manage and administer the funds? So while that summarizes the substantive reason grounded in good practice for our prerequisites, there is more to the why. It is also important to know that FTA is required to have such a risk evaluation framework. Our Code of Federal Regulations requires us to evaluate the risk of all applicants or prospective recipients prior to granting an award. And for some of you that may have previously been subrecipients of FTA funds, this probably isn't a new concept because the entity passing through your funds is required to do the same for its subrecipients. Areas of risk evaluation called out in our Code of Federal Regulations include financial stability, management systems and standards, and an entity's history of performance, past audit reports and associated findings, and an entity's ability to effectively implement requirements. FTA's recipient prerequisites are geared toward evaluating these risks. A parallel I have often heard from recipients is that this sounds a lot like a bank's evaluation of a prospective borrower for a loan. A bank needs to know that its interests are protected and evaluate the risk of providing funds to borrowers that fall across a range of credit worthiness profiles. This may be a helpful way to think about the why from the perspective of FTA making funds available to various entities that may also fall across a range of risk profiles. Okay. So now I'd like to differentiate between types or stages of prerequisites, which we can break down into first-time recipient prerequisites and award-related prerequisites. Tying this back to the concept of evaluating risk of recipients, there are foundational baseline risks that are related to a recipient organization's ability to receive, use, and appropriately manage FTA funds that must be evaluated before that entity receives its first award and applies regardless of FTA funding program or scope of project or activity covered by an award. First-time recipient prerequisites are geared toward addressing those risks. There are also risks that may apply to any recipient on an award-by-award basis that are related to specific FTA funding program, to the specific funding program involved, or to the scope of a project or activity covered by an award. These are award-related prerequisites or requirements. So there is a need to evaluate recipients' risk at a foundational baseline level before a recipient receives any award, and meeting the established bar for that must be maintained in perpetuity. And then there is also a need to evaluate recipient risk at a level that concerns what a recipient is proposing to do and the type of funding it is applying to receive. So some of what you may see us refer to as first-time recipient prerequisites also may apply again to the same recipient on an award-by-award basis, depending on the funding program involved or scope of project or activity covered by the award for which the recipient is applying. And the prerequisite requirements will scale with the extent of what is proposed to be done under the award. Okay. So we'll go to the next slide here. And here I've provided examples of first-time recipient prerequisites and award-related prerequisites or requirements. First-time prerequisites include concepts such as legal capacity, gaining access to our award management and payment systems, a recipient organization's civil rights non-discrimination review, financial and technical capacity. And let's not forget that FTA funds first need to be made available to a recipient for an entity to actually be a recipient. And some of these, as indicated on the slide, may also be unique to and scale with the nature or extent of the activity covered by a specific award. In other words, there may be things you are proposing to do with the funds that will trigger a more targeted review of your compliance with established civil rights requirements, or perhaps your financial wherewithal to deliver a specific type or size of project. Separate from these are a host of potential award-related prerequisites that again come into play depending on the funding source applied for or what a recipient is proposing to do under an award. So now, after having covered this contextual background on who recipients are, risk, the purpose of prerequisites, the types and examples of prerequisites, we can dive more deeply into the financial capacity and technical capacity prerequisite concepts and look at them through a first-time recipient lens and an award-related lens. So let's start with financial capacity. So what is financial capacity? Financial capacity is defined by two basic concepts: the concept of financial condition and the separate concept of financial capability. Financial condition is concerned with historical trends and current experience and the financial ability of a recipient to operate and maintain its transit system at present levels of service. And financial capability is concerned with the stability, sufficiency, and reliability of revenue sources needed to meet future annual capital, operating, and maintenance costs for any planned expansion on top of existing operations. Financial capability builds upon a recipient's financial condition. Financial condition is your baseline, and financial capability is your wherewithal to expand upon that baseline. And why are these financial capacity concepts important? Well, they ensure that FTA's investment in recipients' public transit activities is solvent and that the investment has a high probability of being fully delivered. It is not in FTA's best interest or the mission it is tasked to serve to support public transportation when the rest of the financial pieces that are needed to sustain a supported activity are insufficient or are on shaky ground that jeopardizes the probability of an investment being fully realized. So for financial capacity, we look at conditions such as a recipient's ability to match and manage federal funds, to cover cost overruns and any operating deficits through long-term, continuous, stable, and reliable revenue sources, and to adequately maintain and operate federally funded facilities and equipment. A very rudimentary way of looking at these financial capacity concepts is how well have you managed financially until now, and how well will you manage financially in the future with growth while also maintaining your baseline condition. Very simply, at a fundamental level, your ongoing baseline costs or liabilities for things like operations, replacement of depreciated capital assets, and maintaining capital assets in a state of good repair need to be balanced with stable, continuous, and reliable revenues. And if you have plans to expand upon that baseline that involve additional costs, say by expanding service by a certain amount of revenue hours with a need for additional transit vehicles, bus stop infrastructure, maintenance facility space, etc., you'll need to ensure that, again, stable, continuous, and reliable revenues are available to support that expansion. So zeroing in a bit more on the concept of financial condition, which again is an assessment of recipients' financial baseline. It is a first-time recipient prerequisite that looks at prospective recipients' past and present financial sustainability and management performance, and again assesses such factors as historical trends and current experience of potential recipients' ability to balance costs with revenues. Such an assessment will be focused on audited financial statements and other financial reporting, budgeting, or planning documents that address a recipient's working capital levels. Being a first-time recipient prerequisite, financial condition is evaluated prior to a prospective direct recipient's first award. Taking a look under the hood at the referenced financial documents, FTA evaluates such conditions as cash balances and capital reserves, long-term debt levels, the presence and status of depreciation accounts, and trends and costs compared to available revenues, as well as with relevant economic indicators. Okay. Sorry. Got to get my slide clicker got a little bit out of sync here, so here we go. All right, so to provide some examples and tie this back to prospective recipients' financial condition within a risk evaluation context. Okay, sorry, looking at the chat. So to provide some examples and tie this back to prospective recipients' financial condition within a risk evaluation context, some first-time recipient risk factors may include a recipient being unable to demonstrate a reliable and continuous stream of non-federal revenues to match federal awards, a recipient's operating costs that are increasing faster than revenues that are available to maintain the recipient's baseline service, annual single audit reports if a recipient agency crosses the threshold required for that, involving other federal awards, are delinquent or have yielded concerning findings. For a recipient that relies on borrowing to maintain its costs and revenues equilibrium, a recipient's debt service is consuming future capacity to borrow to sustain its baseline condition. A recipient has insufficient contingency reserves to cover cost overruns or temporary reductions in revenue, or a recipient has a very poor or junk credit rating from organizations that assess public entities' credit worthiness. Okay, so let's focus a bit more on the concept of financial capability, which, as mentioned, builds upon a recipient's financial condition and considers the capability of a recipient to continue to balance baseline costs with revenues and support any expansion beyond that baseline. So it looks out into the future. Financial capability can be considered an award-related prerequisite because it evaluates whether a recipient will be able to balance and appropriately manage the future finances of what the recipient is proposing to do under an award. For most projects and activities, FTA actually evaluates the applicable metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, and states' Transportation Improvement Program and statewide Transportation Improvement Program, TIP and STIP, respectively, to assess for financial capability because a financial analysis must be undertaken and a financial plan must be developed before a project or activity may be programmed in a TIP. A TIP must be financially constrained and must reflect that activities and projects can be financially supported while the baseline is being adequately operated and maintained. However, depending on the scale of a project, FTA may dig deeper and evaluate plans that inform the TIP and STIP, such as the required financially constrained metropolitan transportation plan, short-range transit plans, capital budgets and improvement programs, project-specific financial models or plans, etc. So when does FTA evaluate a recipient's financial capability? FTA reviews and approves STIPs as a whole when they are developed and adopted at the state level, but as it pertains to a recipient's proposal for an award to cover a specific project or activity, FTA will review the TIPs and STIP and any plans that inform it, if necessary, at the grant application stage. For most grants, including those using Section 5307 funds, recipients will be required to self-certify as to financial capacity at the grant application stage, and FTA will follow up with recurring post-award reviews or those triennial reviews to ensure certain financial capacity requirements are being met. Specific components that may be evaluated include future projections of the same components evaluated for financial condition. So things like cash balances, long-term debt, trends in costs versus revenues, etc., and the capability of a recipient to maintain and operate any existing and new assets, providing at least the same level of service for the greater of at least one replacement cycle for such assets or 20 years as appropriate. To provide some examples that tie this back to recipients' financial capability within a risk evaluation context, some award-related risk factors may include a recipient being unable to demonstrate ability to provide match or revenue sources are unreliable for supporting future costs. A recipient is unable to show sufficient revenues for long-term operating costs associated with a new capital investment. Annual single audit reports addressing FTA or other federal awards are delinquent or have not been submitted. A project to be covered by an award is not included in the applicable TIP or STIP. A recipient has had significant or serious findings from recent oversight reviews, or concerns have been identified in financial plans for high-cost projects. So I've discussed this concept of financial capacity from the perspective of an assessment of financial condition being a first-time recipient prerequisite and area of risk evaluation, and from the perspective of an assessment of financial capability being an award-related prerequisite and area of risk evaluation, along with when each is evaluated. And I also mentioned that FTA will allow or will follow up with recurring post-award and post-performance reviews to ensure certain financial capacity requirements are being met after recipient self-certification at the grant application stage. Well, the documentation supporting recipients' self-certification is examined during triennial reviews, and these reviews evaluate the presence of and adherence to adequate financial policies and procedures, and appropriate tracing and reporting of the use of funds, the recipient's organizational structure and the use thereof that defines, assigns, delegates, and appropriately separates fiduciary authority, financial management systems to manage, match, and charge only allowable costs to awards, financial resources for local share for active awards, and to maintain and operate FTA-funded assets, and compliance with indirect costs, single audit, and subrecipient oversight requirements. More information on what FTA assesses related to financial capacity in a post-award stage, including post-award oversight specific webinars, is available on the program oversight page on FTA's website. And to close out this concept of financial capacity, we've provided links to related resources where you can find more information on the concepts I've covered and how FTA operationalizes its assessment of financial capacity. So now we will move on to the concept of technical capacity. And we will start there with what is technical capacity? Well, it involves the capability of a recipient to properly carry out funded activities or complete funded projects, and to manage a federal award in accordance with established program and administrative requirements. And why is technical capacity important? Well, it ensures a recipient is appropriately resourced and structured, so FTA's investment in the recipient's public transit activities is fully delivered and is done in compliance with applicable statutes and policies. Again, for FTA's mission to be effectuated, we need to have confidence that recipients have the resources and structure to fully implement projects and activities with FTA funds. So for technical capacity, we look at conditions such as sufficiency of recipients' human resources and appropriateness of their organizational structure to fully deliver projects and manage awards in a compliant manner, adequacy of recipients' technical oversight to carry out various projects that are necessary to maintain or support growth for the system, satisfactory continuing control over and maintenance of FTA-funded assets, and extension of the same considerations in recipients' oversight of any subrecipients or contractors that they may have. One very simple way to sum this up is do not bite off more than you can chew. Okay, so to help us visualize how technical capacity may come into play through a lens of having sufficient human resources, adequate technical oversight, and appropriate organizational structure under a hypothetical scenario, I've provided a basic illustrative organizational chart for a recipient's baseline condition or baseline level of transit service supported on the left, which consists of a transit manager, service planner, a maintenance technician, operations supervisor with 7 operators and a grants manager, admittedly a very small operation. And let's say that this agency or recipient is planning to add 20,000 annual vehicle revenue hours and is applying for FTA funds to support this service expansion. Accordingly, FTA will expect that the recipient will make necessary adjustments to its resources and structure to sufficiently absorb that additional technical responsibility, which might include the need for an additional service planner, additional maintenance technicians, a number of additional operators, and perhaps an accounting technician to assist the grants manager in accounting for the added financial and grants management responsibility. Okay, so let's break this down by how this concept of technical capacity would apply to a first-time recipient as a first-time recipient prerequisite versus an award-related prerequisite or on an award-by-award basis. For first-time recipients, FTA looks at a recipient's present structure and resources to manage and maintain its current level of service and the assets supporting the service to monitor and comply with what will be future application and program requirements and system registrations, and to complete award and program necessities, such as required project or activity milestones and financial reporting requirements. In evaluating a first-time recipient's technical capacity, FTA may evaluate a recipient's organizational chart, route maps and transit services schedules, internal policy and procedure manuals, such as say for procurement, vehicle maintenance plan and replacement schedule, or any transit development plan supporting a recipient's current or future service. Technical capacity for a first-time recipient is evaluated prior to a prospective recipient's first award. Okay, similar to what we laid out for an evaluation of the financial condition concept under financial capacity, to provide some examples that tie this back to a prospective recipient's technical capacity within a risk evaluation context. Some first-time recipient risk factors may include a history of inability to maintain assets, to establish standards with current resources. The prospective recipient staffing resources are well below industry standard for providing recipients baseline level of service. The recipient doesn't have internal policies or procedures manuals to direct or govern federal actions, such as for procurement. A recipient SAM.gov registration is incomplete, insufficient resources to manage grants and grant performance reporting, or the recipient has no internal planning or programming guidance directing the recipient system's decisions or actions. Okay, and if we break this down by how this concept of technical capacity would apply on an award by award basis as an award related prerequisite, much like the financial capability concept under financial capacity, award related technical capacity looks out into the future and evaluates a recipient's existing and proposed resources and structure to manage and maintain its baseline level of service, plus any service that expands upon that, as well as the assets necessary to support that fully implemented expansion condition. To manage and maintain significant capital projects, the recipient does not normally implement or has not previously undertaken. So for example, maybe a large and complex multimodal transit facility. To monitor and comply with grant application and applicable program requirements and government-wide and FTA-specific registrations, such as sam.gov, and to complete necessary award and program-related actions, such as milestone and financial reporting. In evaluating technical capacity from an award-related perspective, FTA may evaluate a recipient's existing and proposed organizational charts, short and long-range transportation and transit plans, project-specific management plans, previous performance with regard to timely and accurate completion of milestones and financial reporting, results of prior FTA review reports, so maybe for a most recent triennial review or enhanced or special reviews, how a recipient may have performed in its delivery of similar prior projects, what we learned through just pre-award discussions with recipients, or perhaps how responsive a recipient was to information solicited for a competitive funding program as outlined in a notice of funding opportunity for those discretionary programs. And as you would expect, award-related technical capacity is evaluated prior to execution of a grant agreement for the applicable award, and in some cases, particularly for discretionary programs, before allocations for specific projects are announced. And to provide some examples that tie this back to recipients' award-related technical capacity within a risk evaluation context, some risk factors may include a history of difficulty delivering projects at a similar scale, on schedule and within budget, insufficient staff resources to deliver a project to be covered by the award, significant and relevant concerning findings from past oversight reviews, the project management plan for a major capital project is incomplete, other components of the recipient's transit system are inadequate to support the project covered by the award, so maybe not enough maintenance facility space or adequate bus stop infrastructure is not in place, or a lack of necessary qualifications to deliver the project covered by the award. And like FTA's assessment of financial capacity, FTA will follow up with recurring post-award and post-performance reviews to ensure certain technical capacity requirements are being met after recipients have performed on their awards. During triennial reviews, FTA will evaluate compliance with award management requirements, such as whether milestone and financial reporting has been completed accurately and in a timely manner, and whether funds have been expended and awards closed out in a timely manner. FTA will also evaluate compliance with project management requirements, such as whether a recipient has worked to ensure project schedules, budgets, and performance objectives were achieved, whether a recipient ensured project conformity and compliance with all applicable regulations, and whether the recipient obtained all necessary approvals for projects before incurring costs, and whether a recipient provided technical inspection and supervision of all projects and appropriate oversight of any subrecipients for any projects they have undertaken. And further, if a direct recipient has any subrecipients, FTA will evaluate whether the recipient entered into a subrecipient agreement with those subrecipients, laying out all the required components, whether the recipient's oversight program ensures subrecipient compliance with federal requirements and performance goals and provides for evaluation of subrecipient risk of noncompliance with those requirements, and whether the recipient has completed all reporting requirements for subrecipient activities in a timely manner. And as I mentioned earlier, more information on what FTA assesses related to technical capacity in a post-award stage, including post-award oversight specific webinars, is available on the program oversight page on FTA's website. Okay, and to close out this concept of technical capacity, we provided links to related resources where you can find more information on the concepts I've covered and on how FTA operationalizes its assessment of technical capacity. And now we will transition to our question and answer segment, and we'll welcome any questions or comments from our webinar attendees.
Great, thanks, Brett. Really great presentation and really important overview of the technical financial capacity prerequisite. Looking through some of the questions that received. Well, first off, we did get one that I don't think we have the answer to on the fly, which is when will FTA be offering the next financial management oversight FMO training? We will have to get back to you on that. We can send out some information after the fact. Unfortunately, folks on this call don't have that date on hand. So we'll send an email out to everyone. There was a question actually we did get even before this started, and it relates to, okay, so I'll just read it off. Do governors make the recommendation to FTA for legal public entities to be a direct or designated recipient for an area within their state? And actually, Donald, maybe I'll just throw that to you really quick.
Sure, you can throw it to me. But I think it was in Brett's slide, and it's in Brett's slide. He actually hit on it in the presentation. Right, there you go. And so Brett, I'll start off and then you can hit cleanup, all right? So how this works is generally in any state, to receive our formula funds, as Brett will show you when you get the slide, the governor will designate who can receive FTA formula funds, and those will be our designated designated recipients. As I said, so designated recipient by state. Now, if you apply for our discretionary funding, or you receive a congressionally sponsored project, one of those, we bring you in as a recipient and as a grantee, and you will be a direct recipient. Think of it as FTA is giving the funds directly to your organization as opposed to giving it to a pass-through organization. The third way we will provide funding to an entity would be we could provide funding to a direct recipient, or most likely a designated recipient, and another entity could be a subrecipient to that designated recipient, and therefore you wouldn't be a direct recipient, you'd be a subrecipient, as opposed to if you apply for discretionary funding and we give the funding directly to you. So that's the difference between sort of designated, direct, and subrecipient. And I'll pass it to Brett.
Yeah, thank you, Donald. The best way I like to think about this is, first, let's look at where you're at. Are you in a small urbanized area, or are you in a large urbanized area? A small urbanized area is an urbanized area with between 50,000 and 199,999 population. If you're in a small urbanized area, the governor is your designated recipient automatically. They function as the designated recipient. So if you're in a small urbanized area, the governor actually gets that, the money is made available to the governor, and then the governor decides, or the governor's designee decides in small urbanized areas who will be a direct recipient. They have to authorize that an entity, if that entity is going to receive funds and make a grant directly with FTA, they have to authorize that. So it would be the governor automatically in small urbanized areas. And we're talking about formula funds here. So 5307 or 5339A, which is bus and bus facilities formula, or 5337, state of good repair. In large urbanized areas, there is 99% of the time, there is a locally, the law allows for a locally appointed designated recipient. That designated recipient does ultimately have to be appointed by the governor, but only after the public transit providers in the large urbanized area have concurred, and the MPO has concurred And the governor can show that in its designation of a locally appointed designated recipient. That has to be a public entity that is eligible under the laws of the state to receive and dispense federal funds. So in large urbanized areas, a designated recipient can be somebody, some other entity other than the state, and typically is. And then it's the designated recipient in that large urbanized area that has to authorize whether or not a direct recipient will receive funds. So they have to say, yes, this can be a direct recipient, and we're going to give them funds. So that's how it works. Now, there are some cases out there where the state actually still retains designated recipient status in large urbanized areas, but it's rare, but it is out there. So it doesn't always work that way. And if everybody agrees that the state does that, then sure, that's fine. So that's how I would look at it for formula grants. For discretionary grants, there's no such thing as a designated recipient. It's just you're either a direct recipient or you're not. But that's not to say that we do have some discretionary awards that go out to direct recipients, and they're making the grant on behalf of a subrecipient. So the direct recipient that's getting a discretionary award is still responsible for the grant agreement and all the terms and conditions of that with FTA, but they're passing through those funds to a subrecipient and providing the necessary oversight. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Thank you. See, the next question, I'll just answer this one. There's a request to post the links in the presentation. So you all probably noticed there's some kind of highlighted text, and those are all web links, direct web links. So I mentioned at the beginning, we are going to post the PDF version of the presentation itself, the slide deck. It's a PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to post the PDF version, and that's going to have the links in them. So hopefully that fits the bill. And then let's see, another question. Okay, this is a good one. Brett, this one I think is for you. Is financial or technical capacity for agencies in which transit service provisions is just one function or a department among many different functions? Are they evaluated differently between those different scenarios? Does that make sense for you? Am I phrasing that? You know, whether it's a standalone transit agency versus just a transit function within a larger organization. Is there any difference between financial technical capacity and how it's demonstrated? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, yeah, I'm
Yep.
picking up what you're putting down there. So it depends on the aspect of the recipient organization that is being evaluated. For example, within the realm of financial capacity, if it relates to something like the stability, sufficiency, or reliability of revenue sources needed to meet future costs for any planned expansion on top of existing operations, for a multifunctional recipient organization that also provides public services other than transit, FTA may consider the availability of revenue sources that may not have traditionally been directed to transit as being available for transit if it is clear the organization has the discretion to do that and will commit to do that. So, you know, there's a little bit of a different view of how it might work for a multifunctional agency there, of which transit is just a piece. Also within the realm of technical capacity, for instance, that was financial capacity. For an evaluation of a multifunctional recipient organization's technical and human resources to carry out a transit project, organizational resources outside the organization's transit department or typical transit function may be used and considered for satisfaction of the necessary resources if it is clear the organization has that discretion and will commit to doing so. This is actually very common with local governments that operate transit service, but also have multiple other functions. It all comes down really to whether the agency, whether multifunctional or not, can show that it has the necessary financial wherewithal and technical resources to carry out its baseline needs and any expansion needs. So.
Okay, thank you, Brett. Let's see on the list. Okay, so you mentioned the potential need for a project management plan for major capital projects. Could you define what a major capital project is? Like what qualifies a project as a major capital project?
Yeah, so FTA has a specific definition for what constitutes a major capital project as codified in our Code of Federal Regulations. This applies when a recipient is proposing to undertake a fixed skyway project that has a total project cost of at least $300 million and a federal cost share of at least $100 million, and is not exclusively for the acquisition, maintenance, or rehabilitation of vehicles or rolling stock. So projects that qualify as major capital projects per that definition require a project management plan that has specific elements and an additional level of project management oversight that is provided for projects that do not meet that definition. However, the FTA administrator may further determine that a project is a major capital project and will be subject to this additional layer of oversight if it will benefit and protect the interests of FTA or the recipient. And this may apply to projects that involve new technologies that are of a unique nature to the recipient, or it's proposed to be implemented by a recipient whose past record indicates the appropriateness of extending that level of oversight. But aside from this, please keep in mind that while this prescribed level of oversight may not apply to projects that do not meet these thresholds or characteristics, there is always going to be some level of financial and technical capacity evaluation and oversight that scales with the complexity and cost of a project, whether it is done before an award is executed by having a recipient possibly having to do more to show the appropriate resources, or through post-award and performance reviews of, for example, a recipient's reporting on project milestones. So.
Great, thank you, Brett. One more for now. Okay, let me just fill this because I think it's unique to a specific circumstance. So say that our organization is a first-time direct recipient, executing a grant for an allocation received through a discretionary process, right? Like they got a discretionary grant. And as part of that process, the organization had to provide information and supporting materials that did already demonstrate the financial and technical capacity in the application, in order to get that grant. So the question is, given that we already did that as part of the discretionary grant application process, does the organization then need to be evaluated for technical financial capacity again as a first-time recipient and for the specific award in which you're working to obligate the allocated funds related to that grant application?
Okay, yeah, good question. So the short answer is yes, do need to be evaluated again. Financial and technical capacity will need to be evaluated again for that prospective first-time recipient at the grant application obligation stage. The technical and financial capacity information collected in an application to be considered for a discretionary allocation is used for a preliminary evaluation of a prospective recipient's overall ability to compliantly and effectively deliver the project to be covered by the award. However, it does not go into the level of detail FTA needs to evaluate first-time recipients' risks with regard to these capacities. For the application to be considered for a discretionary allocation, the information is used for rating applications. So it's really a ratings tool to see how prepared or ready or how much thought a recipient has put into these technical and financial capacity aspects. But at the grant application and obligation stage, the information and any supporting materials are used to really evaluate the recipient and associated risks from the perspective I've presented today. So it is evaluated again from the perspective that I shared today. And sure, you might have to provide information on technical and financial capacity and a discretionary award application, but that is really used mostly as a ratings tool relative to other applicants. So that's how I would look at it.
Great, thank you. Super helpful. Actually, I wanted to go back really quickly to the question related to the upcoming financial management oversight training, and I said we'd follow up on that. So it doesn't look like the training dates have been selected yet for fiscal year 2024, but I'm in the chat. I'm going to drop in the web page where that information is going to be posted, and the web page itself. I'm putting it in the chat right now. The web page itself actually just states, please contact your regional office for the latest information on this. But yeah, there's nothing out right now, but we will still, ask internally to see if we can get an answer on that. Maybe it's just not posted online, just to double check, and we can follow up regardless. But I just wanted to put that link in the chat so you knew where to find, the web page where that's usually posted. Okay, I think I'm looking through all the chats and the Q&As on these tools. I think we've covered all the questions. And actually with that, if you don't mind, if everyone can just stay on for a moment, since we got through all the questions, I did want to just do a really quick poll. It's a 2-question poll. We're doing this for each webinar, and it's really to gauge, was the webinar and the content presented, this introductory content, appropriate? Did it kind of meet your expectations? So first question is just, did today's presentation improve your understanding of these topics? Forgot to mention up front, everything you submit is anonymous, including the questions. No, the other participants can't see what you're submitting, and actually for the poll, the panelists can't see either. So part of this question, really, you have 4 options: yes, greatly improved; yes, moderately improved; yes, slightly improved; or no, did not improve your understanding of this topic. And then the second question is just, did today's presentations provide an adequate level of information and detail as an introduction to these topics? And the first is just yes, basically the information met that introductory level overview, and then no, it did not provide enough information, not enough detail, and then alternatively, no, it provided too much information or too much detail. Those are the 2 questions. I think we have about 30 responses in. I'll wait maybe a minute or 2. And actually, on that note, I will just quickly go to the very end. Sorry. I did mention that we are going to be posting this online a few times, and so we'll include both the recording and the PDF. If you have any additional questions, please contact your regional office. Any questions related to this topic or the content, please reach out to them. If you have questions related to the webinar series, we do have this email address specifically for this 6-webinar pilot program. So feel free to reach out to us if it relates to the webinar series itself. This is overview of FTA mission, vision, values, and with that, just wanted to thank everyone for joining today. The next few webinars, there's 4. There's going to be basically 2 next week. That's going to be the planning processes and requirements, and then a second one on environmental planning and processes. Then the subsequent week after that, we're going to be going through some of the systems access introductions and overviews. So that's going to be NTD, FACES, ECHO. You'll learn all of these acronyms, and you'll learn to love them. Okay, well, with that, I think I'll close it out. Thank you all for your time, and we are around and available to support you all. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.